Why did they keep staring at her boots? That was the first thing she noticed when she walked into the briefing hall, how no one looked her in the eye. 100 men in uniform, their chatter dropping into a hush as if a ghost had entered. Then the shifting gaze downward to the scuffed leather, the silent proof she had been somewhere they hadn't. She kept walking, shoulders squared, chin steady, but inside a quiet storm was gathering. She didn't like crowds, not anymore. The hall smelled of dust, paper, and sweat. A single fan turned overhead, groaning as though it too resented the long night ahead. On the far wall, a projector flickered, waiting to bring maps to life. She took her seat in the back row as she always did, letting the shadows claim her. Someone whispered her name, or the name they thought was hers. It wasn't the one she'd been born with, not the one her mother used to call out at the end of a long day. That name was buried in a grave somewhere only she could find. Now she was Lieutenant Mara Hallstrom, guard detail, nothing more, nothing less. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was why she had volunteered for this mission. Why she had insisted on being here at the edge of a crumbling city, where tension simmered like fuel waiting for a spark. On paper, it was a simple assignment: crowd control, protect the convoy, ensure no one got too close. Just guards in formation, watching the mass of people as supplies were handed out. Simple. Except nothing about Mara was simple, and nothing about this city ever stayed calm. A voice cut through the silence. Colonel Rist, weathered and sharp-eyed, standing before the map. His pointer tapped on the red circle marking the plaza. "This," he said, "is where it happens. You'll be in pairs. No rifles raised unless ordered. You're not here to intimidate. You're here to stand, to hold, to show restraint." A ripple of unease moved through the room. Everyone knew restraint was a fragile thing. One thrown stone, one desperate hand reaching past the barrier, could unravel the illusion of control. Mara's jaw tightened. She had seen it before, how quickly hope turned to chaos, how quickly chaos turned to blood. Her partner leaned closer, Corporal Finch, young, too young, with eyes still bright from training. "You've done this before, right?" he whispered. She didn't answer at first. Just listened to the hum of the fan, the scrape of boots, the steady rise of her heartbeat. Then quietly, "More times than I wanted to." He swallowed. That was enough for him. But for her, memories were surfacing she had tried to bury. The last crowd she had faced wasn't in a plaza. It was in a village, a place where faces blurred into shadows, where her guard line had fractured, where she'd learned that hesitation could kill, but so could action. She had walked away alive, but with a weight on her chest that hadn't lifted since. And now, another chance, another crowd, another moment where the world would watch to see what the guards would do. When the briefing ended, the soldiers filed out in groups. Laughter broke out, forced and brittle. Someone lit a cigarette. Someone else cursed about the heat. Mara lingered, waiting until the hall was nearly empty. That was when Colonel Rist approached. His voice was low, meant only for her. "You requested this posting. Why?" She didn't flinch, didn't blink. "Because I know what happens when guards fail." The colonel studied her. His eyes softened just for a breath. Then he nodded and walked away. She stayed there a moment longer, alone with the whir of the projector, her hands curled into fists against her thighs. Outside, the night pressed heavy over the base. The air smelled of smoke drifting from the city, sirens in the distance. A dog barked, then fell silent. She walked past the barracks, past the rows of armored vehicles, until she found herself near the fence line. Beyond the wire, the city lights pulsed dim and tired. She thought of the people gathering tomorrow, desperate for food, water, medicine. She thought of their eyes, how hunger made them sharp, how grief made them reckless. And she thought of her brother. He had been in a crowd once, a different one years ago when soldiers opened fire too soon. He hadn't made it out. She closed her eyes, drew a long, steady breath. That was why she was here. Why she had chosen the boots, the uniform, the silence, to make sure it didn't happen again. But she hadn't told anyone, not yet. The next morning broke hot and brittle. The plaza stretched wide, its cracked tiles glowing under a pale sun. Banners flapped against rusting poles. The convoy rolled in, trucks heavy with supplies, wheels grinding against stone. Soldiers spilled out, forming lines. Guards at intervals standing firm, Mara among them. The crowd had already gathered. Hundreds pressed against the barriers. Women clutching children, men with hollow faces. Eyes that spoke of long nights without sleep, long days without food. The noise was constant, pleas shouted, names called, the clang of metal against the barricades. It was a wave of sound that pressed into her skull, threatening to unbalance her. "Hold the line," Finch murmured, more to himself than to her. Mara stood still, breath steady, eyes scanning. Then she saw him. A boy, 12, maybe 13, thin arms gripping the barrier, his face pale, his voice lost in the roar of the crowd, but his eyes locked on hers. For a moment, everything else blurred. Because those eyes, they were the same color as her brother. She froze, her chest tightened. The memory surged unbidden. The last time she had seen her brother alive, caught in the tide of panic, his hand reaching for hers, her body trapped by the line of soldiers, her voice hoarse from screaming his name. "Mara!" The whisper startled her. It was Finch. "You okay?" She blinked. The boy was still there, staring. The crowd surged, hands reached, shouts grew louder. She nodded stiffly, forcing the past back into the shadows. "I'm fine." But she was. Because she knew. Something was coming. Not just hunger, not just desperation. There was a tension in the air, a crackle like static before lightning strikes. Someone in that crowd wasn't just waiting for food. Someone was waiting for a spark. And when it came, the guards would either hold or break. Why did the boy stop shouting when the others grew louder? That question gnawed at her as the sun climbed higher, burning against the cracked stones of the plaza. The crowd pressed harder against the barriers, voices merging into one desperate plea. Yet the boy, thin, sharp-eyed, had gone quiet. His hands clung to the rail, but his lips were still, watching. Mara's chest tightened. She scanned the line. Other guards shifted nervously, sweat running down their necks. Finch, beside her, licked dry lips, his knuckles whitened around his baton. "You see that?" he muttered. "What?" "That man third row back, black scarf, he's not here for food." She followed his gaze. A tall figure, shoulders squared, eyes cutting through the sea of desperation like a blade. He wasn't shouting, wasn't begging, just waiting. Mara's stomach sank. There it was, the tension she had felt all morning, embodied in one silent stare. The crowd wasn't just hungry, it was primed. And someone like him, he could turn hunger into fury with a single word. Her radio crackled, the voice of Colonel Rist, steady, clipped. "Hold your ground. Supplies will be distributed in sections. Do not escalate. Repeat, do not escalate." Mara steadied her breathing. The order was simple. The order was always simple, but reality never was. The first truck unloaded. Boxes thumped onto the ground. Aid workers moved quickly, forming a small station. A narrow gate opened in the barrier. Families pressed forward, clinging to their chance at survival. The guards shifted. The crowd surged. Mara felt the ground tremble beneath the weight of bodies. And then shouts turned to screams. A woman stumbled. Someone pulled at her bag, hands clawed, desperate to steal. The guards raised their voices, shouting commands. Finch tensed, baton halfway lifted. "Wait," Mara said sharply. "But there." "Wait." Her eyes darted to the scarfed man. He hadn't moved. Not yet. The chaos was surface level, not the true break. If they reacted too soon, they'd give him exactly what he wanted. So she waited, heart pounding, muscles tight. The woman regained her footing. The workers shoved more supplies forward. The crowd settled into a rhythm, imperfect, strained, but holding. For now. Finch exhaled. How did you know? I didn't. Her voice was low. I just know what happens when you move too fast. He studied her, but didn't press further. Mara's eyes returned to the boy, still silent, still watching. His gaze unsettled her more than the scarfed man did, because he looked at her as if he knew her, as if he saw past the uniform, past the silence, into the wound she carried. And that wound ached, sharper with every passing minute. She shifted her stance. Her boots scraped against the stone. The sound was small, but it pulled her back to another plaza, another barrier, another crowd. Her brother's hand slipping from hers as gunfire erupted. His body swallowed by the stampede, the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. She clenched her fists, forced the memory back into its cage. This was not then, this was now. But the past was a ghost that refused to stay buried. The sun blazed overhead. Time dragged. The first section of the crowd thinned as supplies reached their hands. Relief flickered briefly in the air before frustration returned. Not enough boxes, not enough bags, not enough hope. Mara saw it before anyone else, the ripple of agitation spreading outward like cracks in glass. The scarfed man moved at last, lifting his head, lips parting to speak. Her body tensed. But then another voice cut him off. An old man, bent-backed, leaning on a cane, standing near the barrier. His voice rose above the din, trembling but firm. Patience, patience for the children. The crowd hesitated. The old man's face was lined, his eyes tired but fierce. He raised his cane, gesturing toward the smallest ones at the front. And just like that, the moment shifted. The scarfed man's words died before they began. Mara felt her throat tighten. The old man's courage, fragile but real, was enough to steady the storm. For now, Finch muttered, never thought one voice could do that. She didn't reply, because she knew one voice could do many things. She had seen crowds bend to hate, to fear, to rage, because one voice gave them permission. And she had seen the opposite too, though rarely. The old man looked at her then, just a glance, as if he understood the battle she was fighting inside, as if he too carried ghosts. The hours stretched, the convoy dwindled, the sun bled into gold, then into dusk, and still Mara stood, silent, watching. When the final box was passed, when the gates closed, the crowd groaned with disappointment. Not everyone had received what they came for. Not everyone could be saved. The scarfed man melted away into the shadows. The boy was gone too. Mara's chest hollowed with unease. Absence was its own warning. Back at the base, fatigue settled heavy in her bones. Guards joked half-heartedly, shaking off the tension. Some smoked, some prayed. Finch collapsed onto his bunk, sighing. That was close, he muttered, too close. Mara sat on the edge of her cot, removed her boots, stared at the floor. She thought of the boy's eyes, the old man's cane, the scarfed man's silence. And the question that wouldn't leave her, why had the boy stopped shouting? She lay back, eyes open to the ceiling. Sleep didn't come, only the memory of her brother's voice, faint and fatting, only the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another crowd, another test. And deep down, a truth she hadn't spoken aloud. She wasn't here to guard supplies. She was here to guard herself from repeating the mistake that had cost her everything. But what she hadn't realized yet was that the crowd wasn't finished with her. Not by far. Why was the plaza so quiet at dawn? That was the first sign something was wrong. The second was the smell, smoke drifting faintly on the breeze, clinging to her uniform as if it belonged there. Mara stood at the barrier, scanning the city beyond. Streets usually alive with restless bodies were eerily thin. Only a few figures moved in the distance, shadows slipping between ruined walls. Finch fidgeted beside her. Where is everyone? Mara didn't answer. She just listened to the silence, to the absence of the constant hum of desperation. Crowds never disappeared without reason. Not here, not after months of scarcity. A shout broke the stillness. Down the road, a boy ran barefoot, his voice carrying before his body reached them. He skidded to a halt at the barricade, chest heaving, eyes wide. "They're coming," he gasped. "Not for food, for you." Mara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. The boy, the same one who had watched her yesterday, silent, unblinking. Now his lips trembled with urgency. "What do you mean?" she demanded. But he only shook his head. Too many. And then he vanished into the alleys, swallowed by the city. Finch swore under his breath. What the hell was that? Mara didn't reply. She was already moving, signaling the others down the line. Her instincts screamed what her mind refused to say aloud. The crowd hadn't vanished. It was gathering, somewhere close. Her radio crackled, Colonel Rist's voice calm but sharp. Convoy delayed. Reports of mass movement in the South Quarter. All guards brace for unrest. Mara's jaw tightened. The South Quarter was 2 streets away, too close. And then she heard it. The rumble, not engines, not thunder, but feet. Hundreds of them, marching in uneven rhythm, growing louder with every heartbeat. The plaza would not stay empty for long. Guards shifted nervously. Batons tightened in white-knuckled grips. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else spat, muttering about bad luck. Finch's voice cracked. "What do we do if it's not like yesterday?" Mara kept her eyes forward. "We stand, that's all we ever do." But inside, fear gnawed at her. The last time she had heard a sound like this, she had lost her brother. The last time she had failed. She would not fail again. The crowd appeared suddenly, flooding from the side streets into the plaza, filling the empty space like water rushing into a basin. Men, women, children, but not just desperate now. Angry, voices rose, sharp and ragged. Stones clattered against the ground. And at the front, him. The scarfed man. His eyes burned with something colder than hunger. He raised his arm and the roar grew louder. "Stay calm," Rist's voice snapped in her ear. "Hold positions, do not provoke." But the order felt fragile, useless against the wave of fury breaking toward them. The crowd surged against the barriers. Metal groaned. Guards braced. Mara felt the force shudder through her arms, rattling her bones. "Push back," someone shouted. "No weapons," another countered. Chaos rippled, confusion spread. And then a stone arced through the air, striking a guard's helmet with a hollow crack. He staggered. The line wavered. Mara's throat went dry. She saw it happening. The moment the line would collapse, the barrier would break, and the guards would be swallowed whole. Her eyes darted to the scarfed man. He hadn't moved, not yet, waiting, measuring. And then she saw the boy again. Not in the crowd this time, but perched on a low wall to the side, eyes fixed on her, watching. Why him? Why always her? Her hands trembled. For a breath, the memory of her brother surged back. The last time she had seen eyes like that. The last time she had heard the thunder of a crowd turning feral. "Mara," Finch's voice snapped her back. The barrier rattled again. A hand reached through, grabbing at Finch's vest. Mara struck it away with her baton. Shouts rose, furious now. The scarfed man stepped forward, raised his voice, and for the first time Mara heard him. "They starve us while they guard the scraps." The crowd roared in response, a wave of fury crashing harder than before. Finch panicked, baton lifting high, his muscles coiled to strike. "No," Mara grabbed his arm. "They'll tear us apart." "Not yet." She shoved his arm down, met his eyes, forced him to see her certainty, even if she didn't fully feel it herself. Because she knew, if the first blow came from them, there would be no return. Another stone flew, another shout tore the air. And then gunfire. Not from the guards, from somewhere beyond the plaza. Sharp cracks echoed off the walls. Screams tore through the crowd as people dropped, scattering in panic. Mara's blood ran cold. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was orchestration. She saw flashes, figures on rooftops, rifles glinting in the sun. Not soldiers, not aid workers, outsiders, agitators, turning the crowd into a weapon, then punishing it. The scarfed man shouted again, but his words were lost in the chaos. The crowd buckled, surging in all directions. Guards stumbled, trying to hold their line. Mara's instincts screamed, this was it, the moment everything would break. And then she saw him, the boy still on the wall, frozen as bullets cracked too close. His body stiff, eyes wide with terror. Without thinking, Mara moved. She vaulted the barrier, shoving through panicked bodies, ignoring Finch's shout behind her. The smell of sweat, fear, and blood closed in as she pushed toward the boy. A bullet sparked off stone nearby. She ducked, heart hammering. The boy stared at her, too shocked to run. "Move," she shouted. But he couldn't. His legs trembled, rooted to the wall. She grabbed him, pulling him down, shielding his body with hers as another shot rang out. The crowd surged around them, chaos swallowing order. For a moment, all she could hear was his ragged breathing against her chest. All she could feel was the weight of his small frame, so much like her brother's had been. Her brother, the ghost that had driven her here, the memory that haunted every step. She clenched her jaw. Not again, not this time. Bullets cracked, shouts rang, the world spun into madness. And somewhere Colonel Rist's voice shouted through the radio, orders lost in static. But Mara only heard her own heartbeat, thundering with one truth. The guards were no longer just holding a line. They were standing between life and death. And she had just stepped beyond it. How far could she carry him before the crowd swallowed them both? That was the only thought pulsing through Mara's skull as she dragged the boy down from the wall, her arm locked around his trembling shoulders. The air cracked with bullets, the smell of hot dust and gunpowder choking her lungs. All around, people screamed, some running, some falling, some clawing at the barriers for safety. "Stay low," she barked, but his small body clung to her, rigid with terror. She shoved forward, pushing against the tide of bodies. The crowd wasn't moving as one anymore. It had shattered into fragments, panic tearing it apart. Some surged toward the guards, others scattered into the alleys. And in the middle of it, Mara fought to carve a path back to the line. Behind her, Finch's voice cracked over the roar. "Mara, what'll you get back here?" She didn't answer, couldn't. Her throat was too tight, her chest too heavy. The boy's weight pressed against her ribs, not heavy in body but heavy in memory. Every step echoed the last time she had carried a child through chaos. Her brother, limp and bleeding, her screams lost under the thunder of boots and gunfire. This time, she told herself, she would not lose him. A bullet pinged off the barrier. Metal rang like a bell. Guards ducked. One shouted into the radio, his words swallowed by static. Mara stumbled forward, the boy's breath hot against her collar. Almost there. And then a figure blocked her path. The scarfed man. He stood firm in the chaos, eyes sharp, body still. Not running, not afraid. His lips curved into the faintest smirk as if to say, "You've already lost control." Her grip on the boy tightened. She couldn't read his intent. Was he leading this chaos? Was he just another face using the storm to settle old scores? He stepped closer, voice cutting through the din. "Do you see now? They'll never see you as their protector, only their prison." Mara's jaw clenched. She had no words for him, no time. She shoved past his shoulder, brushing hers. His voice followed, low, venomous. "You can't guard them from themselves." Her pulse spiked. She forced herself not to turn back, forced her eyes forward until she reached the barrier. Guards hauled her and the boy through, shouting over the chaos. "Are you insane?" one barked, grabbing her arm. "You'll get us all killed." She wrenched free, dragging the boy behind her. Finch stared at her, disbelief and fear colliding in his face. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. Her voice came out hoarse. "I wasn't going to let him die." "You're supposed to hold the line." She didn't answer, couldn't. The boy's wide eyes clung to hers, silent questions trembling in their depths. Behind them the crowd pressed harder. The barrier buckled under the weight. Another crack of gunfire split the air. Colonel Rist's voice finally cut through the static. "Hold formation, pull civilians to cover, suppressive fire only if targeted." The guards scrambled, dragging families through side gates, shielding them with armored vehicles. The plaza was a battlefield now, half riot, half ambush. Mara crouched low, pulling the boy behind a supply truck. His breaths came fast, shallow, his hands fisted in her sleeve. "You're safe," she whispered, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Was anyone safe? Finch dropped beside her, helmet askew, sweat streaking his face. "Colonel's gonna have your head for that stunt." "I don't care." "You don't care," his voice cracked. "You could have got us both killed." She met his eyes, her own steady, unflinching. "I couldn't let it happen again." Something in her tone silenced him. For a moment the noise around them faded, and he studied her face, the weight in her gaze, the ghosts pressing against her skin. "Again?" he asked softly. Her throat tightened. She looked away, unable to answer. The boy stirred, whispering something in a language Finch didn't understand. Mara did. She had learned enough over long deployments to catch the single word repeated again and again. "Brother, brother, brother." Her chest hollowed. The sound pierced deeper than any bullet. Another explosion rattled the plaza, closer this time. The rooftops flashed. Shadows moved with rifles slung low. Whoever had orchestrated this wasn't finished. Rist's voice roared over the radio. "Identify snipers, secure civilians, do not lose the plaza." Mara rose to a crouch, scanning the rooftops. Her training screamed at her to take position, to find the shooters, to return fire. But her body stayed anchored to the boy, shielding him, as if leaving him unguarded would rip her open. Finch tugged at her sleeve. "We need to push them back. If we don't, we'll be overrun." She shook her head, her voice low. "It's not the crowd we're fighting, it's whoever's above us." He frowned, trying to understand. "Then why aren't we firing back?" Because, she thought, the first rifle crack from the guards would turn chaos into massacre. And she knew better than anyone what a massacre felt like. Instead, she raised her radio. "Colonel, permission to reposition." Static, a pause, then, "Negative, hold your post." Her jaw clenched. She looked again at the rooftops, at the moving figures hidden in the glare of the sun. She could almost hear their intent: pull the guards into firing, draw the crowd's blood, let anger do the rest. And the guards, caught between order and chaos, would be crushed. She lowered the radio. Her decision was already made. She turned to Finch. "Keep him safe." She nodded toward the boy. His eyes widened. "Wait, you're not." But she was already moving. She vaulted over the hood of the truck, weaving between soldiers and civilians, her boots pounding against cracked stone. The noise swallowed her, the roar of the crowd, the cries of the wounded, the sharp staccato of rifles above. She found cover at the base of a wall, pressed close, scanning upward. There, three figures, rifles braced against crumbling ledges, picking targets with cold precision. Her weapon felt too heavy, her breath too loud. But she steadied herself, the world narrowing to lines of shadow and angles of stone. She whispered under her breath, not prayer but memory, her brother's name. And then she moved. A shot cracked, grazing stone where her head had been a second before. Dust showered her hair. She rolled, pressed against the wall, her heart hammering. She could climb. She could take them. She had done it before in darker alleys under heavier fire. But every step would be her choice alone, against orders, against reason. Her hands shook. Her brother's voice echoed in her ears. "Don't leave me." She closed her eyes, drew one long breath, then opened them again, steady. This time, she would not leave anyone behind. Why did the sound of children's laughter feel heavier than the echo of gunfire? She sat against a crumbling wall in the courtyard of an abandoned school, her rifle resting across her knees. The chalkboard was still there inside, faded with numbers and words written by small hands that probably hadn't grown much taller since. She could almost hear them running in the halls, their sneakers squeaking, their voices colliding. But the school was empty. The laughter was real. It was outside the wire. The village children were chasing a plastic bottle tied to a string. They made a game of it, their voices breaking into bursts of pure joy that carried across the dusty street. She envied it, in a way she couldn't admit to anyone else. That innocence, untouched by war, even if war pressed its boots against their door. Never gets easier, huh? A voice broke in, pulling her back. It was Malik, leaning against the doorway, one of the guards she had come to know over the weeks. He was quiet most of the time, watchful, the kind of man who spoke when it mattered. He was older than the others, lines etched deep around his eyes, and sometimes he smiled with a sadness that didn't need words. "They don't know the cost yet," she said softly. "Or maybe they do," Malik answered, "and that's why they laugh louder." She looked at him, wondering how much he had seen, how much he carried. They never spoke directly about his past, but the weight in his stance told her enough. And yet she realized she had her own weight too. That morning before patrol, she had opened her pack and found the letter folded at the bottom, the one she couldn't bring herself to send. The words were there, written in her hand but unfinished. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when Mom passed. I'm sorry I let duty take me farther away when you needed me closer. I don't know how to make it right, but maybe this is all I know how to do, protect others because I couldn't protect you." She hadn't signed it. She didn't know if she ever would. Her throat tightened as she thought of it now. The sound of an engine carried across the village, a truck too heavy, too fast. She and Malik turned at the same time. Her rifle came up instinctively. Dust plumed on the road. The laughter of the children stopped. The truck slowed, then stopped short of the checkpoint. Men climbed out, not locals she recognized. Their clothes were too clean, their movements too stiff. They weren't here for trade or talk. The guards at the post stood firm. She could see it in the way they squared their shoulders, the way their hands hovered near their weapons but didn't yet draw. Discipline, measured, like a storm holding back until the first crack of thunder. "Stay," Malik said, his voice low, steady. He stepped forward, joining the others. She wanted to move too. Her training told her to cover, to be present, to be part of the line. But something about the air shifted, something in the way Malik's words carried more than caution. It was as if he knew this would test not just her readiness, but her restraint. The men from the truck began shouting. Demands, accusations. Their voices carried sharp edges like blades dragged against stone. Villagers emerged slowly from their homes, drawn by the noise. The crowd gathered, unease rippling through them. And then an arm reached out. One of the outsiders shoved a boy aside as he tried to dart past. The child stumbled. His plastic bottle clattered across the dirt. Her muscles tensed, heat rising up her spine. The image burned her vision. Not the boy, though she wanted to protect him with every part of her being. No, it was the memory that hit her harder, her brother, younger, shoved by a stranger in a crowd years ago. She had been too far away then, too small, too helpless. She had sworn never again. She lifted her rifle, her breath catching. But Malik's voice cut through, firm, heavy, "Not yet." The guard stood taller, silent but unyielding. The outsiders spat curses. One raised his hand as if to strike, and that was when it happened, quietly, decisively. Malik stepped in front of the boy, no words, just presence. His hand didn't go to his weapon. His eyes did the work. The crowd hushed. Even the children stopped breathing. Something about the way Malik stood, broad, unmoving, carrying every scar of every year he had lived, shifted the balance. The outsider faltered. His hand dropped. The tension snapped without a sound. The truck left minutes later, engines coughing, threats tossed into the wind. The boy retrieved his plastic bottle. Laughter returned, uncertain at first, then louder, as if to prove it could not be taken. She exhaled, realizing her hand still trembled around her rifle. She lowered it, ashamed and grateful at once. Malik came back to her side. He didn't gloat, didn't explain. He just said quietly, "That's why you don't rush. Sometimes strength isn't the bullet. Sometimes it's the silence before it." She nodded, though her chest still ached with the urge she had felt. The need to act, to strike back, to not fail again. That night in the dim light of her quarters, she opened the letter again. The unfinished words stared at her. She added one line before folding it back. "Today, I learned patience can be protection too." But she didn't sign it, not yet. Outside, the village slept. Guards walked their rounds. The children dreamed of plastic bottles and endless games, and she lay awake, wondering how many battles could be fought without a sound. And if silence in its own way was louder than war. What did it mean when fear wore a familiar face? She woke before dawn, not to the call of duty but to a whisper she couldn't name. The room was dark, dust floating in the single sliver of moonlight that pressed through the cracked window. For a moment she lay still, listening. The village was quiet, too quiet. The dogs hadn't barked. The wind didn't move. Even the guards' footsteps outside seemed muted, as if the night itself was holding its breath. She slid from the cot, her boots silent against the floor. Her rifle was already in her hands before her mind caught up with her instincts. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, in the pulse at her temple. Then a sound, not close, not far, the faint scrape of metal against stone. She pressed her back to the wall, listening harder. The scrape came again, followed by a hushed voice. Not the voices of guards she knew. These were rougher, sharper, words spoken with intent. Her throat tightened. Infiltration. She moved toward the door, keeping low, her weapon raised. The village still looked asleep under the pale glow of the moon, but shadows shifted where they shouldn't. Figures slipping between alleys, crouched low, purposeful. She counted 4, no 5, maybe more. The guards hadn't sounded an alarm. That meant they hadn't been seen yet, or they were already down. Her chest ached with the thought. Malik's face flashed in her mind, his voice from the day before. Sometimes strength isn't the bullet, sometimes it's the silence before it. But this wasn't silence anymore. This was intrusion. She pushed forward, slipping into the outer courtyard, and there she saw him, Malik, standing with 2 other guards at the far side of the wall. They weren't unaware. They had seen. They were watching, waiting. Why weren't they moving? Why weren't they calling the alarm? She crept closer, her breath shallow, until she was within earshot. Malik's voice was low, steady, almost too calm. "Not yet," he whispered to the others. Her grip on the rifle tightened. Not yet. They were inside the perimeter, armed, advancing. How could he? But then she saw what he saw. The figures weren't rushing. They weren't attacking. They were placing things along the wall, small boxes, wires. Her heart lurched. Explosives. She wanted to shout, to fire, to stop them now before it was too late. Every part of her screamed to act. But Malik's eyes, calm, unshaken, met hers in the dark. A look that told her to trust, even when trust felt like madness. The intruders finished their work, retreating slowly, one by one, melting back into the shadows. She raised her weapon. Malik shook his head. No. Her jaw clenched so tight it hurt. She lowered it by a fraction. Only when the last figure disappeared into the hills did Malik move. He walked to the wall, knelt down, studied the box left behind. With careful hands, he pulled at the wire, his fingers sure, deliberate. He disarmed it in silence, as if plucking a thorn from the earth. When he was done, he held the small device up to the moonlight. primitive but deadly. Then he crushed it beneath his boot. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "Why didn't we stop them?" she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of fear and anger. Malik's reply was steady. "Because they wanted us to. They wanted noise, a gunshot, a shout. They wanted proof of presence before they left their trap, but silence starved them, and now their failure will haunt them louder than our bullets ever could." She shook her head, still trembling. And what if they had succeeded? He looked at her with eyes heavy as stone. "Then we would bleed, but not today. Today, silence was the stronger weapon." She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her body was still caught between fury and relief, between the need to act and the lesson she hadn't asked to learn. Later, alone in her quarters, she opened the letter again. The words blurred in the faint light. She added a new line beneath yesterday's. "Sometimes the hardest part is not pulling the trigger. Sometimes it's trusting silence when every nerve screams otherwise." She still didn't sign it. The village woke with the sunrise, unaware of how close the night had come to fire and ruin. Children laughed in the streets, chasing their games. And she walked among them, her rifle slung across her shoulder, her heart caught between fear and something else she couldn't yet name. Perhaps hope. But one question lingered, gnawing at her like an unanswered call. How long could silence hold against the storm? What happens when silence is no longer enough? The day began with sunlight, sharp and unrelenting, pouring over the ridges like molten gold. The village stirred awake slowly, as if trying to convince itself that the night before had not happened, that no strangers had crossed the wire, no shadows had pressed against the walls with explosives in their hands. But she hadn't slept. Not really. The images looped in her head, men placing charges with steady hands, Malik watching with equal steadiness, her own finger itching against the trigger. The discipline it had taken not to fire still burned in her muscles. She sat by the well in the courtyard, filling her canteen. Around her, life went on. Women carried baskets, children laughed as they ran barefoot over dirt paths, and the older men sat beneath a canopy, smoking in silence. But beneath the rhythm of daily life, she felt the tension, thin, stretched, invisible to those who wanted to pretend it wasn't there. And then it came. The sound. Engines, multiple, rolling heavy from the hills. Her head snapped up. Malik was already on his feet at the wall, his posture tense in a way she hadn't seen before. This wasn't a probing. This wasn't whispers in the dark. This was the storm. She slung her rifle across her chest and moved to the line. Dust plumed in the distance as 3 trucks barreled toward the village, faster, louder, bolder than anything before. Villagers froze. Mothers pulled children close. The guards formed at the gate, shoulders squared, weapons held tight. Malik stood at the center, a stone among reeds. She slid beside him. "They're not testing us this time," she muttered. "No," Malik said. His voice was low, hard. "This time they want to break us." The truck screeched to a halt. Doors slammed. Men poured out, rifles in their hands, voices raised. Shouts, accusations, demands. Their leader stepped forward, his face marked with old scars, his eyes sharp and cruel. He pointed to the villagers, to the guards, spitting words thick with contempt. She couldn't understand all of it, but the tone was enough. Surrender, submit, yield. The guards didn't move, not a step. The leader barked again, angrier. He gestured. 2 of his men grabbed a villager from the crowd, a young man barely more than a boy, and dragged him forward. The mother screamed, trying to hold on, only to be struck aside. The boy fell to his knees, a rifle barrel pressed against his head. Her chest constricted, her finger brushed the trigger, her vision narrowed. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, feel the air grow thin. Malik didn't move. "They'll kill him," she hissed, her voice ragged. "Wait," Malik answered, his eyes locked on the leader. "Wait for what?" her voice cracked. "Until it's too late." Malik finally turned, his gaze cutting through her panic. If we fire first, they slaughter everyone. But if they fire first, the crowd will know who they are, and they'll never be welcome again. It was madness, it was strategy, it was both. The leader pressed the rifle harder against the boy's skull. The crowd gasped. A mother sobbed into her hands. And in that unbearable silence, something shifted. The boy didn't beg, didn't cry. He lifted his chin just a fraction, but enough. Defiance. The crowd saw it, the guards saw it, even the outsiders saw it. The leader's face twisted. He wanted fear. He found resistance. And then for the first time Malik spoke. His voice carried like thunder, low but undeniable. Words in the local tongue, slow, deliberate. The boy is not alone. The guards stepped forward one pace in unison. The crowd followed, voices rising, not with weapons but with sheer presence. The leader hesitated. For a heartbeat, the village stood taller than his guns. She held her breath. And then he shoved the boy away. Hard, but he didn't fire, not yet. Instead, he spat at the ground, barked an order, and his men retreated back to their trucks. Engines roared, dust choking the air as they pulled away, leaving tension hanging like smoke after a fire. The boy stumbled back to his mother. The crowd surged, hands clutching him, pulling him close. The sound that followed wasn't silence this time. It was something deeper, a collective breath, a choice made. She lowered her rifle slowly, her body trembling, her throat raw. "They'll be back," she whispered. "Yes," Malik said. His voice was tired, weighted. "And next time silence may not be enough." That night she didn't open her letter. She sat alone instead, staring at the dark ridges where the trucks had gone. She thought about her brother, about the times she hadn't been there, about the boy today who refused to bow his head. And she wondered, what would she do when the storm finally broke? Because it wasn't a question of if. It was when. What do you do when the storm you feared finally arrives, and there is no silence left to hide in? The night was restless. Dogs barked at shadows. The air pressed heavy, thick with waiting. She hadn't written in her letter. Couldn't. Every time she picked it up, her hands trembled, her chest tight. She knew why. Some truths could only be written after the last page of a story was turned. Then it came. Engines, louder this time. More of them. Headlights cutting across the ridges like knives. She grabbed her rifle and ran. The guards were already at the wall, Malik in the center, unmoving, his silhouette carved against the pale moon. The villagers stirred, voices rising in fear, doors slamming, children clutched close. But Malik didn't flinch. Not when the first truck skidded to a halt. Not when dozens of armed men poured out, shouting, their weapons raised high. Not when the leader, the scarred man, stepped forward with something darker in his eyes. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was conquest. The villagers froze behind the guards, eyes wide, waiting. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. She wanted to scream, to fire, to end it before it began. But Malik's hand rose, steady, deliberate. Wait. The leader spat words thick with venom. He pointed to the village, to the guards. His voice rose, demanding submission. Then his hand shot up, a signal. Gunfire erupted. The world cracked open. Bullets ripped the walls, dust exploded in the air. Children screamed. Mothers dragged them inside. The guards fired back, disciplined, measured. Their line didn't break. She dropped to her knee, sighted, squeezed. One man fell, another. Her breath was fire, her blood ice. Every shot was a promise kept, never again, not this time. But they kept coming. More trucks, more men. The guards fought with precision, every round purposeful, yet they were outnumbered 10-1. A grenade rolled across the dirt. She saw it too late. Malik didn't. He lunged, kicking it back before it could arm fully. The blast shook the ground, deafening, but the wall held. The guards held. She fired again, teeth clenched, ears ringing. Smoke filled her lungs. Her hands shook, not from fear but from rage, raw, consuming. She thought of her brother, of the boy yesterday, of the laughter of children in the courtyard. None of it would be stolen, not tonight. But then she saw it. The scarred leader breaking through the chaos, pushing forward, weapon raised, his eyes locked on the villagers huddled behind the line. Malik moved. She shouted, but her voice was swallowed by the storm. The scarred man fired. Malik stepped into its path. The sound ripped through her. She dropped the gun, sprinted, caught him as he staggered. His blood soaked her hands, hot, heavy. His eyes, steady even now, locked on hers. "Hold the line," he whispered, his voice a rasp of air. "Show them why guards are never to be messed with." And then his hand went still in hers. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only rage. Her scream tore through the battle as she picked up his rifle. She rose, firing with a fury she didn't know she had. The guards followed, the villagers too, hurling stones, sticks, anything they had. The line surged, unbroken. The outsiders faltered. For the first time they looked small, outnumbered not by guns but by will. The scarred man's eyes met hers across the smoke. For a heartbeat he wavered. Then he turned, ordered retreat. Engines roared again. Trucks peeled away into the night, carrying their failure with them. Silence fell, not the heavy silence of fear, but the kind that follows thunder, the kind that leaves the earth changed. She knelt beside Malik, her hands trembling, her throat raw. The villagers gathered, quiet, reverent. The boy, the same boy who had lifted his chin in defiance, stepped forward and touched Malik's still hand. No one spoke, they didn't need to. Later, as dawn broke, she sat with her letter again. This time she finished it. "I couldn't protect Mom, I couldn't protect you, but tonight I learned something. Sometimes strength isn't noise, sometimes it isn't fire. Sometimes it's a guard standing tall, holding the line even when no one else can. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and that is louder than war." She signed her name and folded the letter with hands still stained by his blood. When the crowd gathered that morning, they stood not in fear but in respect. They had learned what Malik had lived, what she now carried. That guards, silent, steady, unyielding, were never to be messed with. Because sometimes the greatest battle wasn't won with bullets. It was won with the weight of standing firm. And that silence lingered long after the storm had passed.